Sunday dinners at my family home had become an obstacle course of subtle jabs and forced smiles since my father married Diana 2 years ago. I was used to her dismissive glances, but nothing prepared me for what happened that evening. As we sat around the dining table, Diana suddenly looked at my father and announced, "Thomas, let's be honest. Philip has always been useless. He's 27 and still living here. Let's just take his room for the girls." Her daughters, Jessica and Amanda, nodded enthusiastically. "It makes sense," Jessica added. I stayed silent, watching their smug expressions. If you are watching this from a similar family situation, hit subscribe. What happened next changed everything. I had graduated with a computer science degree 4 years ago, but struggled to find stable work in our small town. The tech industry had taken several hits, and the local job market was brutal. After a promising startup I had joined went bankrupt, I found myself back in my childhood home, temporarily living with my father while job hunting. My mother had passed away from cancer 5 years ago, leaving a void in our lives that seemed impossible to fill. The house still contained small touches of her everywhere. The kitchen herb garden she had lovingly tended. The slight chip in the living room window frame from when she had accidentally knocked it with her favorite vase. The soft blue paint in my bedroom that she had helped me choose when I was 14. These were small things, but they mattered to me. They kept her memory alive. 2 years after her death, my father, Thomas, a kind but passive man who worked as an accountant, met Diana at a community fundraiser. She was all bright smiles and attentive glances, laughing at his jokes and touching his arm just so. Within 6 months, they were married, and Diana moved in with her two daughters, Jessica and Amanda. "She makes me happy again, son," my father had told me when announcing their engagement. "I never thought I could feel this way after your mother." I had smiled and congratulated him, pushing aside my reservations for his happiness. At first, Diana was careful to maintain her charm around me. She would cook elaborate meals and insist we all eat together as a family. She would ask about my job search with seemingly genuine interest. But small cracks began to appear in her facade. It started with redecorating. Without discussion, my mother's carefully chosen curtains disappeared, replaced by heavy drapes in colors she would have hated. The family photos were rearranged with fewer images of my mother on display. When I mentioned it, Diana smiled tightly and said, "We need to make room for new memories, Philip." Then came the comments, small at first. "Your mother certainly had unique taste," she would say, looking disapprovingly at a lamp or vase. Or, "I suppose job stability was not something you learned from your parents." Each remark delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. I tolerated it all for my father. He seemed happier than he had been in years, and I did not want to spoil that for him. But as the months passed, Diana grew bolder, and her daughters followed her lead. Jessica, the older one at 25, was studying for a business degree and never missed an opportunity to mention it. Tall, with perfectly styled blonde hair and an arsenal of designer clothes, she treated the house as if it was already hers. She was calculating, always watching for advantages and weaknesses. Amanda, 23, was softer around the edges, but just as poisonous when it suited her. She was studying art history and worked part-time at a gallery fax. She managed to weave into every conversation. More than anything, she craved her mother's approval, mimicking Diana's behavior and amplifying it to earn her smiles. Together, they had gradually taken over the house. The living room became their domain, filled with their magazines and laptops. The bathroom counter overflowed with their products. The refrigerator stocked only foods they preferred. When my father was not around, they dropped all pretense of civility. "Still here?" Philip, Jessica would ask when passing me in the hallway. "Still unemployed," Amanda would add with a false, sympathetic smile. The first major confrontation came 3 months after they moved in. I noticed my collection of rare computer science books was missing from the shelf in the living room. These were expensive textbooks, and some signed first editions I had collected throughout college, representing both sentimental and monetary value. I found them stacked carelessly in the garage, some with water damage from a leaking pipe. When I confronted Diana, she feigned surprise. "Oh, those old things. I thought they were just taking up space. Nobody reads physical books anymore, Philip. Everything is digital now," she said with a dismissive wave. "Those were expensive textbooks, and some rare editions," I explained, trying to keep my voice level. "Well, you should have put them in your room then," Jessica interjected from the couch. "The living room is a shared space." A shared space that now only has your fashion magazines and Amanda's art books, I pointed out. Diana's eyes narrowed slightly. Thomas, she called to my father, who had just entered the room. Philip is creating a fuss over some old books we moved to make space for the family. My father looked between us, conflict evident on his face. Son, maybe you could keep your special books in your room. We need to make accommodations for everyone now. That was the first time I felt the sting of betrayal from my father. It would not be the last. The family dinner that changed everything began like any other Sunday evening. Diana had prepared roast beef, my father's favorite, with potatoes and green beans. The seating arrangement at our rectangular dining table told its own story of the household hierarchy. Diana, at one end, my father at the other, her daughters along one side and me alone on the opposite side. Diana dominated the conversation as usual, discussing the charity committee she had recently joined. The coordinator was so impressed with my organizational skills, she was saying. She practically begged me to take a leadership role. My father nodded along, looking more withdrawn than usual. He had been working longer hours lately, and I noticed new lines of strain around his eyes. Jessica and Amanda added supportive comments to their mother's story, creating a wall of conversation that excluded me entirely. I was pushing food around my plate when Diana suddenly turned her attention to me. Thomas, she said, addressing my father, but keeping her eyes fixed on me. We need to discuss the sleeping arrangements in this house. My father looked up, confusion crossing his features. What do you mean? Well, Diana continued, her voice taking on that reasonable tone she used when saying something unreasonable. The girls are sharing a room, which was fine temporarily, but they need their own spaces. Jessica needs quiet for her business studies, and Amanda needs room for her art supplies. We have 4 bedrooms, my father pointed out. 1 for us, 1 for each of the girls, and 1 for Philip. Diana smiled tightly. Yes, but the girls need spaces to grow. Jessica will be starting her internship soon, and Amanda is working on portfolio pieces. Meanwhile, her voice took on an edge. Philip is just here. Then came the words that sent a chill through me. He has always been useless. Let us just take his room. It makes perfect sense. Jessica chimed in quickly. He could move to the basement. It is not like he does anything but play on his computer anyway. We could convert it into a proper studio space for me, Amanda added excitedly. Those north-facing windows would be perfect for natural light. They continued planning the redistribution of my personal space as if I were not sitting right there. I remained silent, watching them, noting how they did not even attempt to disguise their contempt anymore. My father cleared his throat awkwardly. I do not think that is necessary. Philip is looking for jobs, and he needs a proper room. It has been months, Thomas, Diana countered. At some point, we need to accept reality. The girls have futures to prepare for. The implication was clear. I did not have a future worth considering. The conversation continued through dessert, with Diana laying out all the reasons why my displacement made perfect sense. By the time coffee was served, she had moved on to discussing paint colors for the new studio, as if the decision had already been made. After dinner, I found my father alone in his study. He was staring at paperwork, but not really seeing it. Dad, I said quietly, are you really considering what Diana suggested? He sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing his eyes. Philip, you know I support you. But Diana has a point that the girls need their own spaces too. They are trying to build careers. And I am not, I asked, hurt evident in my voice. That is not what I meant, he backpedaled. It is just. Diana thinks the basement could be converted into a nice space for you. More privacy, even. I stared at him, recognizing the rehearsed quality of his words. Those are her arguments, not yours. She is my wife, Philip. We need to make compromises to make this blended family work. The only one compromising seems to be me, I pointed out. He looked pained. Just think about it, okay? The basement has that separate entrance. You could come and go without causing friction. Translation, without irritating Diana. I left his study feeling hollow. The man who had taught me to stand up for myself was now suggesting I literally move underground to appease his new wife. The next weekend, I found myself relocating to the basement. My father had hired someone to install basic insulation and lighting, but it remained what it was, a basement with concrete floors, a small bathroom with a shower that ran cold after 3 minutes, and a persistent smell of dampness. I set up my desk and computer, hung my clothes on a metal rack, and tried to make the space livable, but the symbolism was not lost on me. I had been relegated to below the house, out of sight, while Diana and her daughters expanded their territory above. Within days of my relocation, I noticed items going missing when I returned from job interviews. My good wireless headphones disappeared from my desk. A signed first edition programming book I had kept beside my bed was nowhere to be found. When I asked Amanda about it, having seen her browsing through it days earlier, she widened her eyes innocently. Why would I take your old book? I can get the latest edition if I needed it. Diana's control over household decisions increased exponentially. The Wi-Fi password changed without notice. The refrigerator was stocked exclusively with foods her daughters preferred. Even my father's favorite weekend breakfast of bacon and eggs was replaced by Diana's preferred avocado toast and smoothies. More concerning was my father's declining health. He seemed perpetually tired, the circles under his eyes darkening. When I suggested he see a doctor, Diana interjected, "I am taking good care of him, Philip. He is just working hard to provide for all of us." The all of us statement rankled, considering I was actively trying to remove myself from the equation by finding work. Despite having a degree from a good university, the job market remained challenging. I had progressed to second interviews for several positions, but kept falling at the final hurdle. One afternoon, returning from yet another promising but ultimately unsuccessful interview, I collected the mail and noticed something unusual: correspondence from the bank regarding a remortgage of the house. The house that had been fully paid off years ago. The house my mother had loved so dearly. Later that evening, I overheard Diana and my father arguing in hushed tones in their bedroom. "The financial advisor said this is a mistake," Diana, my father, was saying. "We do not need to access the equity in the house. Your retirement fund is too conservative," Thomas, Diana replied firmly. "This is an opportunity to invest in something with real returns. Jessica's friend's father made a fortune in this market, but risking the house, it is not a risk. If you know what you are doing," she cut him off. "Besides, the girls need seed money for their ventures. Amanda's gallery showing and Jessica's business plan." My blood ran cold. They were remortgaging my childhood home, my inheritance, to fund her daughter's projects. And what ventures? Jessica had never mentioned. A business plan to me, and Amanda's art, from the little I had seen, was mediocre at best. When I tried to talk to my father about it the next day, he brushed me off. "It is just some financial restructuring, Philip. Nothing to worry about." But the luxury purchases that followed told a different story. Diana's new SUV, Jessica's designer wardrobe expansion, Amanda's expensive art supplies, and weekend trips to find inspiration. Something was very wrong, and my father, either through love or manipulation, could not see it. The breaking point came suddenly, though in retrospect all the signs had been building toward it. I was at a coffee shop working on a job application when my phone rang. It was the hospital. My father had suffered a minor heart attack while at work and had been admitted. I rushed to the hospital, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When I arrived, I found Diana already there, sitting in the waiting room, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when I entered. "Where is he? Is he okay?" I demanded. "Room 412, she replied, still looking at her screen. "The doctor said it was minor, no permanent damage. They want to keep him for observation." Her cold demeanor shocked me. Her husband was in a hospital bed, and she was checking social media. When I entered my father's room, he looked small and pale against the white sheets, monitors beeping steadily beside him. He smiled weakly when he saw me. "Just a little scare," he assured me. "Nothing to worry about." But the cardiologist told a different story when I spoke to him in the hallway. My father needed to reduce stress immediately. His blood pressure was dangerously high, and his cholesterol levels were concerning. The doctor recommended a less demanding work schedule and a calmer home environment. Later that evening, as my father rested, I overheard Jessica and Amanda in the hallway outside his room. I had gone to get coffee and paused when I heard them mention my name. "Once Dad transfers the house, we won't have to deal with Philip anymore," Jessica was saying quietly. "Mom says we can legally ask him to leave." "What about the inheritance stuff?" Amanda asked. "Doesn't he get something? Mom has it covered," Jessica replied confidently. "The new will changes everything." She said Dad agreed it makes sense for everything to go to her, and then she can take care of us all when the time comes. When will that be? The callousness of Amanda's question made my stomach turn. Not soon enough, Jessica laughed softly. But Mom needs him to sign the transfer papers while he's thinking clearly. She's bringing them tomorrow. I stood frozen coffee forgotten in my hand. They were discussing my father's death and their inheritance while he lay recovering from a heart attack. And what transfer papers, what new will? As I tried to process this information, Diana emerged from the elevator clutching her designer purse. She dropped it as she reached for her ringing phone and several items spilled out. Among them was a manila envelope with my father's name on it. When she bent to gather her belongings, I quickly stepped forward as if to help and caught a glimpse of the document inside property transfer papers for our family home, already filled out with Diana as the sole recipient. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. This was not about blending families or making room for her daughters. This was a calculated financial takeover. My father, vulnerable after my mother's death, had become their target. And now, with his health compromised, they were moving to complete their plan. I spent the night researching. First, I located the family lawyer who had handled my parents' estate planning. He was retired now, but agreed to speak with me as a favor to my mother's memory. What he told me confirmed my fears. The original will had left the house and most assets to me, with provisions for my father's new wife to remain in the home for a reasonable period if he predeceased her. There was no legitimate reason to change these arrangements unless someone was trying to divert the assets. Next, I researched Diana's background more thoroughly than my father ever had. What I found was alarming. She had been married twice before meeting my father. Both previous husbands were older men with assets. Both marriages ended shortly after assets were transferred into joint accounts or her name. One ex-husband had tried to contest the transfers but died before the case concluded. The other appeared to have simply given up. Her daughters were accomplices, having played the same roles in their mother's previous households. The pattern was identical. Move in, isolate the target from family, rearrange the household, then begin financial maneuvers. Armed with this information and copies of the original will and property deeds, I returned to the hospital the next morning. I arrived to find Diana sitting by my father's bedside, papers spread on the movable tray table. "These just need your signature, Thomas," she was saying softly. "Then you won't have to worry about anything while you recover." My father looked confused but had a pen in hand. I stepped into the room. "Dad, don't sign anything," I said firmly. Diana's head whipped around. "Philip, this is a private moment between husband and wife." "What exactly is he signing?" I asked, moving to my father's side. "Just some insurance papers," Diana said smoothly. "Nothing that concerns you." I reached for the documents. "If it's about the family home, it absolutely concerns me." Diana stood up, blocking me. "Thomas, tell your son to leave. These are our financial matters." My father looked between us, confusion evident. "What's going on?" "She's having you transfer the house solely to her name," I said bluntly. "The house that Mom helped pay for. The house that was supposed to stay in our family." "That's ridiculous," Diana snapped, but her eyes darted nervously to the papers. "Is it? Then you won't mind if Dad has the family lawyer review these documents first." My father's expression changed from confusion to concern. "Diana, what is this about?" Before she could answer, I laid out everything I had discovered: the previous marriages, the pattern of asset transfers, the discussions I had overheard between her daughters about the inheritance. Diana's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little snake. After all I've done for this family, what exactly have you done except try to erase my mother and steal our property?" I countered. My father's voice, stronger than I had heard it in months, cut through our argument. "Diana, is what Philip's saying true?" The look she gave him was chilling in its calculation. I could see her weighing options, deciding on the most effective strategy. "Thomas, you know how Philip has always resented me." She began, her voice softening. "He's jealous of our happiness and making up stories to come between us." "Then explain these," I said, producing copies of property records from her previous marriages. "And explain why Jessica and Amanda were discussing your plans for Dad's assets in the hospital hallway yesterday." My father's face had gone pale again, but this time with anger rather than illness. "Diana, I want you to leave now." We'll discuss this when I'm discharged. Thomas, be reasonable. Now he repeated firmly. And take your daughters with you. Diana gathered the papers with shaking hands. You'll regret this. Both of you. She stormed out. My father leaned back against his pillows, looking suddenly old. Tell me everything, he said quietly. For the next hour, I shared all my findings with him. The financial transactions I had discovered, the conversations I had overheard, the history of Diana's previous relationships. As I spoke, I watched realization and then grief wash over his face. I've been such a fool, he whispered when I finished. You were grieving, I said, taking his hand. She targeted you because of that. That evening, my father made 2 calls from his hospital room, one to our family lawyer to ensure no documents had been filed without his knowledge, and another to a locksmith to change the locks on our home. I want them gone when I get home, he told me firmly. All 3 of them. Diana did not go quietly. She called repeatedly, alternating between tearful pleas and vicious threats. When those tactics failed, she sent Jessica and Amanda to collect their belongings, likely hoping to remove valuables in the process. I supervised their packing, cataloging every item they took. Their dark looks promised retribution, but with the property records secured and the lawyer alerted, they had lost their leverage. My father was discharged 3 days later, returning to a house cleansed of Diana's presence. The relief in his eyes when he walked through the door without encountering her was palpable. I'm sorry, son, he said, as we sat in the living room that evening. I should have seen through her from the beginning. She was good at what she did, I replied. And you wanted to believe in a second chance at happiness. Legal proceedings began immediately. My father filed for divorce on grounds of attempted fraud and financial exploitation. The lawyer also prepared restraining orders after Diana made several attempts to enter the property in my father's absence. The morning that everything came to a head arrived with perfect clarity. I was brewing coffee in the kitchen when I heard car doors slamming outside. Looking through the window, I saw Diana's SUV parked across our driveway. She and her daughters were marching toward our front door. I stepped onto the porch before they reached it. You need to leave, I said firmly. The restraining order is clear. This is still my home, Diana snarled. Thomas is making a terrible mistake and you're poisoning him against me. The locks have been changed, I informed her, and the police have been called. As if on cue, a patrol car pulled up behind their vehicle. Diana turned face, contorting with shock. You can't do this, she screamed. Thomas, talk to me. My father appeared beside me on the porch, standing straighter than he had in months. It's over, Diana. The lawyer has all the evidence of what you were trying to do. What evidence? There is no evidence. But her panicked expression said otherwise. The officer approached, paperwork in hand. Ma'am, I need to verify that you've been served with this restraining order. What followed was a scene that neighbors would discuss for months. Diana, realizing the game was truly over, collapsed into dramatic sobs on our front lawn. Jessica alternated between comforting her mother and screaming threats about lawsuits. Amanda, perhaps the least committed to the scheme, simply stood in stunned silence. The locksmith arrived as scheduled, changing the last of the exterior locks, while Diana and her daughters watched from the street, their belongings hastily packed into their SUV. The officer remained present, ensuring the transition stayed peaceful despite Diana's hysterics. You'll regret this, Jessica called out as they finally prepared to leave. Nobody crosses our family. I simply watched from the porch as they drove away, Diana's tear-stained face glaring at me through the passenger window. The irony was not lost on me. They had tried to take my room, my home, my inheritance, and now they had lost everything instead. My father's recovery, both physical and emotional, began in earnest after their departure. With the stress of Diana's manipulation removed, his color returned, and the cardiologist noted improvement in his condition. We worked together to restore the house to its former state, rehinging pictures of my mother that Diana had relegated to storage, replacing the heavy drapes with the light curtains my mother had loved. I moved back into my proper bedroom, removing all traces of Jessica's planned takeover. The basement returned to being just a basement, not a reluctant living space for an unwanted stepson. My job search gained new momentum without the constant undermining from Diana and her daughters. 2 weeks after they left, I received an offer from a tech company in the neighboring city, a position that would allow me to commute while still being present to support my father during his recovery. 3 months after Diana's departure, we received news that validated all our suspicions. A family friend called to warn us that Diana had been seen around town with another older gentleman, a recently widowed business owner with considerable assets. The pattern was beginning anew, but this time at least one potential victim had been warned. My father and I reconnected with family friends who had been gradually excluded during Diana's reign. Sunday dinners resumed, now filled with genuine laughter and conversation instead of tension and subtle jabs. We invited my mother's sister and her family, rebuilding bridges that Diana had systematically burned. I keep thinking about how I could have been so blind, my father confessed one evening as we sorted through old family photos for a new album. Your mother would be so disappointed in me. Mom would understand, I assured him. She'd just be glad you figured it out before it was too late. He nodded, picking up a photo of my mother in the garden she had loved. You know what I've learned from all this? Sometimes the people who seem most concerned with family are the ones who understand it least. Diana talked constantly about building our new family, but she never understood what family really means. And what does it mean? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective after everything that had happened. Protection without possession, he said after a moment of reflection. Love without conditions. Standing together against threats, not creating them. He looked at me with eyes clear of the fog Diana had created. Your mother knew that, and you reminded me. The experience changed my perspective on family in profound ways. I learned to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, even when everyone else is acting as if it's right. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish when you're protecting something valuable. And I learned that some losses, like my mother's death, can't be filled by replacements, but must be honored by remembering what they taught us. My father and I developed a new honesty in our relationship. We discussed finances openly, ensuring that both of us understood the state of our assets and the plans for their distribution. The new will he created was transparent and fair, reflecting his values rather than someone else's manipulation. As for Diana and her daughters, we heard they moved to another state, presumably to find new targets. Sometimes I wonder if their next victim will see through them more quickly, or if they'll succeed in their schemes elsewhere. But mostly I focus on rebuilding what they nearly destroyed: my relationship with my father, our sense of security, and the legacy my mother left us. Have you ever faced someone who tried to push you out of your own life? How did you recognize what was happening? Share your experiences in the comments below. If my story helped you identify toxic patterns in your own relationships, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life lessons. Remember, standing up for yourself is not selfish. Sometimes it is the only way to protect what matters most. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the strength to recognize manipulation before it takes everything from you.